Heroes are normal people who commit to defending their way of life. That's something our guest said today, and it really resonated with me. I'm Aaron, and this is the Bear Market Brief podcast. To close out 2022, I wanted to focus on Ukraine, but in a different way than in our prior coverage. I wanted to zoom in past the geopolitics, past the military strategy, and focus on what the war has been like for regular people. This episode, I was joined by Kirill. We'll leave it at his first name, a resident of Kyiv, an open source conflict researcher, and Russian political refugee. You're going to hear about displacement, both internal and international, life during blackouts, community solidarity, government services, queer acceptance, language politics, and attitudes towards Zelensky. But this is not meant to be the definitive final story. This is a fragment in the mosaic of lived experiences that make up the war. Before we dive in, though, a quick note that proceeds from this episode will be donated to Vostok SOS, a civilian-focused Ukrainian aid organization selected by our guest. Vostok SOS does great work assisting those displaced by the war. I'll include a donation link in the episode description. People still need help, and if you're looking to make a holiday donation, this would be a great place. Kirill, thank you so much for joining today.
Thank you for having me.
So let's start at the beginning of the war with your experience here. Where were you when the war broke out?
So it was kind of a weird thing because most of the stuff I've been doing was monitoring this stuff, and it was coming up closer and closer, and the worse and worse scenarios were going to be more likely. And at the same time, I was trying to get my refugee papers. I've been actually in an arduous 8-year process to get a refugee status in Ukraine, and long story short, I did it. They called me like back in January and said that we will have your papers ready by some mid-February stuff. And I came there and I begged and I pleaded and I said I need those papers now because you know what's going to happen. And they were of course like, nothing's going to happen. It's all just scare talk. So that's how I ended up leaving Kyiv with basically the first tracks because I was waiting there to have a chance to grab my papers because it would be well to have at least some documents on you in the middle of a war, when there's going to be all the checkpoints and stuff. So I ended up getting them only when I got back to Kyiv, but that's how it happened that at the first hours of the war, like even before that, I saw, I think, what got me to realize that it's going to be a full-on invasion when Russia closed the airspace along the entire border, including like the northern regions. That was meaning they were going all in. It was not like some kind of large Donbass operation. It was going to be like the full-scale invasion, the whole package. Which is why first thing I did, I went to a journalist friend on the other bank of Kyiv because I would need to evacuate somewhere out west. I have a friend, another friend in Vinnytsia, which is like out there in like western part of central Ukraine. I could describe it like that. And I was really afraid that first thing they were gonna do is like hit and destroy the bridges. Only now I realize how hard this actually is, but I thought that I wouldn't want to be trying to find the ways to cross the Dnieper in the middle of a war. So I just went to the right bank. We went to some kind of bar, and I was out there. I was they guys already left at that point. I was listening to the Putin speech, where it was basically the declaration of war speech, and I was like, I don't know, it was something like I was trying to. I think I wanted to reenact one or two moments. I just my raising my head from my phone and like in the most dramatic voice, I'm saying war, why not? And everyone's like, whatever. I mean, people. It was hard for people to realize, to internalize what's going on, because when I was like going out there to have my like car share, there is this blah blah car thing. It's a car share thing that goes like around cities, uh, between cities. So when I went out there, the taxi driver was very nice that he actually didn't. Finished my ride first and then went to his kids. So the thing was cancelled, and I am just standing there finding some kind of trying to hitch a ride, trying to get on this marshrutka bus. Probably anyone who's ever been to the former Soviet Union knows the experience of marshrutkas. Now imagine getting a marshrutka to get you out of what's gonna soon be a war zone, which actually is a war zone because I am looking up on my Twitter chats and they say like we're hearing loud explosions in central Kyiv. And I was there. I just caught the marshrutka. I was reading the news and trying to get out of Kyiv. I think it took me about an hour to get out of the city itself, and that was kind of the start of the great Kyiv traffic jam. And then I think I hitched a ride to Zhytomyr, and out there I got a proper city, like intercity bus to Vinnytsia, and there while I was waiting, everyone was just so eerily normal still at that point. I even like gave a comment to some Ukrainian media. For some reason, I was compelled to do that in Ukrainian, like for the first time ever. And so I hitched a ride, went to my friends, and there I spent like the first few months of the war. I didn't even hear any kind of explosions or anything, even though Vinnytsia was attacked several times while I was there. That was before that big attack that claimed a lot of people's lives.
So
Uh,
a lot to process here. Thank you so much for sharing so far. A couple of points to clarify, step back for the audience. So just we'll get to your kind of refugee, how you arrived in Ukraine to begin with. I'll ask about that in a little bit. Um, Also for listeners, just because we mentioned here the right bank of the Dnieper, if you're looking at a map of Ukraine and you haven't been familiar with the terminology, the right bank is what's going to look like the left side of Ukraine to you. So it's moving west. So just that clarification for listeners. So
to quote Timothy Snyder, you have to think like a river. If you are flowing south, then the left bank is to the left of you, so it would be the eastern bank for the most part, and vice versa.
exactly. So you mentioned in the run up to the war, you saw the kind of prognosis, the situation getting worse and worse. Did you think it was actually going to be a full scale war until the airspace closure? What do you think was the most likely scenario?
Yeah, I literally up until that point, I still thought that those forces they were out there to project the effect of that they are going to be there, so that Ukraine would have to keep lots of their own troops defending the entire border, and that would kind of make easier the Russian job of cutting off the Ukrainian forces in the Donbass itself, the largest group of the Ukrainian forces, and basically after that present to the fait accompli and get Ukraine to recognize those areas. And well, I don't know what that would actually entail. I don't, but that I don't know either. It was my own bias because I didn't want this to start happening where I live, but that still was the likeliest scenario, and that was actually, I think, the most plausible scenario for a Russian victory. They could have potentially done this, not that they were actually going for, but that was kind of the most realistic one because they also wouldn't have to occupy quite a lot of territory with a potentially hostile population. and that that's that's what I thought was going to happen, but apparently uh, Putin didn't listen to smart analysts from the West who said that that would be um, not the best course of action. And what do you know, it turned out to be not the best course of action.
Turns out. So you said when we were preparing for this that in April you came back to Kyiv. So was the situation there that Russia withdrew from the north and you felt safe going back?
Yeah, basically, I would have come like even early in early April. My basically, I think the I like to quantify the stuff to do it in some specific terms. When is it actually safe? The safe part was when the Ukrainians would have cleared the Zhytomyr highway, which was going west, because if Russia could push south of Zhytomyr highway, that then the possibility of actually encircling Kyiv, it was still out there, which is why I wanted to make sure that it happened. But I only could go when I could actually contact the immigration service to make sure that my papers were going to be in order. And basically, I had to go in with just photographs of the papers, which led to kind of an interesting conversation with, I believe, Security Service of Ukraine operative. And that was pretty amicable, I could say, especially compared to what Ukrainians have to go through with in the occupied territories. And I was let off, and haven't had any problems with the law ever since.
Understood. You also mentioned as part of this that you took in, was it a whole family from Kherson? How did that even get arranged, and what was that experience like?
There was this guy who is trans who went away like to live in Kyiv, and one land to another. He ended up in my apartment. We had this kind of arrangement of a shared apartment, but it kind of fell apart. So I ended up the only guy paying this pretty small amount, you would say. Uh, it's like under $500 for a four-room apartment, which is very low in on Kyiv standards right now. But I've been like very good about it, and my landlady is very nice and understanding, which is kind of weird, I know, but that's the way things are. So he just lived at my place for some time, uh, because I just had a spare room. And then he and his family, they left for, I believe, somewhere way out west, but the accommodation like wasn't great. They had to share like five people in a two-room apartment. And then he asked if his family gonna could come live with me. I said fine. So that's what happened, and we've been sheltering here like for quite some time. So now they actually went back to pick up their dad, who stayed in Kherson and who lived there through the occupation, and now they are going to find some arrangement to go to Europe, maybe because the dad, he's disabled, he's had a stroke, and that's actually I am living like a quite way up there. Um, it's a high rise apartment building, and with the elevators not working, it's like not the best place for a disabled person.
Yeah, I can imagine. So actually, a question about this that I wanted to follow up on, not the specifics of taking someone in, but more broadly, how people are relating to each other during the war, people in the same community, neighbors. Have you seen a change in how that's worked in Ukraine? Has social cohesion increased in any way?
Yes, people actually do start helping each other. Coming back to my landlady, she was like absolutely fine when I didn't pay my rent for the time when no one actually lived at the apartment. And there is also a lot of other stuff. People just generally more, attentive with the businesses. Like, for example, you wouldn't actually imagine a situation when you come to some kind of gas station and just start working on your laptop. That's not something that's actually possible back then. I think it would still be some issue. You would get some weird looks at the very least. But now it's okay. And when we had that first larger blackout, it was very in late November when it was the most massive attack so far. I just went to that gas station, got some coffee, and just literally sat there in the corner uh, near the charger working, no one bat an eye. That's one thing. And of course, there is also the thing that a lot of people are donating to any charity they can find. They are military charities, civilian charities, you name it. Everyone is fine to take in anyone who is coming from out there in the war zone and the occupied territories. Yes, that's something that's been happening a lot, and yeah, you could say that. Although I haven't had any first-hand experience with the actually like a war zone situation. I mean, the closest it was the larger blackout. So we, but as I see it, people out there, a lot of them are volunteering. My therapist was volunteering for quite a lot of time. She went to live in Portugal, and she's volunteering from there, especially working with other volunteers, working with burnout cases. This is something that she did pro bono, and that's like one example of people trying to pull their weight.
A question about the blackouts, which you mentioned. First, just for context for the listeners, what's the weather like in Kiev right now? How cold is it?
It's, I guess, just a bit below freezing. I'm sorry, I don't know how much is that in American degrees. So just a bit below freezing. It was quite coldish a couple of days back, and it is kind of an issue because the problem is not that it is actually cold for now, but that when the power goes out, so does the heating. So there are sometimes some moments when you have heating but no power, or power but no heating. But generally, when everything goes out, it goes out together. And that can kind of be an issue because my apartment got pretty cold last time, and there are ways to cope with that. I have pretty warm clothes. I have thermal underwear. I have two or three blankets, and that's actually very fine and comfortable. And I have a thermal bottle with tea, which I just heat up. I am just lucky that way because my apartment building is not that new, so my it has gas, as in cooking gas, and so the stove is not electrical. So I can actually boil my own tea in a blackout, and I can cook my own dishes in a blackout, and not everyone has that opportunity. So people have been buying gas powered thingies which are used to cook food. So that is kind of an issue, but people are coping for now. I don't know how it will actually work when we are like in minus 20 in American. That would be freaking cold territory.
Yeah, the technical term. One question that I want to ask that I hope isn't too glib or not taking this seriously enough, but what do you do? What do people in your community do during blackouts, which can last hours? How do you spend that time?
Well, doom a lot. Sadly, to my work especially, a lot of people doom scroll apparently. That's one thing that you can do. You can sit there and doom scroll because uh, they even started getting Wi-Fi back when the air raids were more frequent, although less consequential for most people. So they installed Wi-Fi into some air raid shouter so you can doom scroll in an air raid apparently. And that's that thing the Kherson refugee family that's been with me. They've been doing that a lot, and you do other stuff. I go outside, touch snow. But no, actually, it's a good way to do some of the chores that you need to go outside for. There is always some kind of store that has a generator, at least now. So you can walk like 10 minutes to a store or something. You can go out, get a coffee. You can read books. Actually, that's a good thing, even like an ebook, because you can just switch off the um, mobile data connection that would save your battery, and you can go and read. I've been reading Good Soldier Schweik and giggling a lot because it's about like an Austro-Hungarian soldier in the First World War, and if you believe the guy description, the Austro-Hungarian army, it was pretty much in every way just as dysfunctional as the Russian army is. And it's kind of you see a ton of parallels there, and they're really amusing.
So you mentioned Wi-Fi getting installed and more generators around. So kind of the flip side of the coin from social cohesion, state capacity, the government's ability to be responsive to people, provide services. Has that changed at all during the war?
Yes, actually, because everyone was being mad at the utilities, being mad at the Ukrozaliznytsa. It's quite a mouthful. It's the Ukrainian railroad company. So being mad at every aspect of state services, it was kind of as Ukrainian as Borscht. But the way they've been working now, like the Ukrozaliznytsa, the thing like when I was going back to Kyiv, it was actually the time when Russia was trying to disrupt, I think, the Western supplies of weapons, and they started striking substations that supplied power to the railroad, actually. And they switched it for some, diesel powered locomotives. They repaired that quickly. So, long story short, I and my train was late for 2 hours in the middle of a missile attack, and I ended up arriving to Kyiv like 40 minutes late. That's like one example of how they've been doing pretty great. There is, of course, some kind of, what do you say, that's not quite a lack of communication from some of the utilities because the power is always so unpredictable, and this unpredictability is kind of like they're trying to predict that. You have this chart which says when your power is out, when your power is going to be back on. But most of the time is just we have an emergency blackouts, which means that you can get a power off any time. Of course, everyone understands that the big issue here is that the power grid is in under like kind of immense strain, but still, it's something that the communication part something that could have been a bit better. This guy from this the tech, which is actually a large oligarchic conglomerate, power and coal and everything conglomerate. He said that in some Western interview that people should be kind of evacuating, people should be leaving, and he had to walk back his words because naturally everyone went into a panic. I think the most thing the many Ukrainian officials wish that their content wouldn't be translated back into Ukrainian, that they're saying to the Western media just to see how grave the problem actually is. But when it's translated back, they wish they didn't say that because it causes the panic back home. Even though the home the message is that we have everything under control, and for the most part it's true. But still, it's kind of gets a mixed messaging situation. As to the general cohesion of state services, there was also, I think, another issue is that I think first one who raised the story was Alina Mikhailova, a member of the Kyiv City Council, who is actually in the army, and while she's not in the army, she's going to the city council meetings, and she said that there was quite a lot of issue with the invincibility points in Kiev itself, like specifically Kiev.
What's an
And
invincibility point?
invincibility point is this place where you can charge your stuff, where you can get warm, where you can have internet, where you can have some hot drink, and they are supposed to be established by the government that any business can declare themselves an invincibility point, which of course drives up the commerce somewhat because I mean, at least I feel compelled to at least have a coffee when I am going into some kind of place when I actually not doing this to have a coffee when you need to do all those things that I've mentioned. So the government-run invincibility points have had quite an issue in Kyiv. I've seen that firsthand because at the big blackout, I didn't know where I was even supposed to go. The cellular connection went out. It goes out pretty fast in a blackout because a everyone goes onto it. B a lot of the towers are working on batteries, not so many work on generators. So I had no power. I had no idea where I should go to get some. I was riding around on my bicycle. I passed the kind of city district neighborhood borough administration, and it was like dark. So I said it's supposed to be an invincibility point because they said like go out to places like schools, like government buildings. Then I actually went to a gas station, and it had internet, it had power, it had everything. It had those sales assistants in their nice suits. It was kind of a different world. So you could say, like at least in Kyiv, businesses they responded better. Although I think it's not a Ukraine problem; it's a Kyiv problem because even Zelensky had to single out the Kyiv authorities that they did not do it really well. All over the country, I think it's generally better. Although some guy, some mayor from Western Ukraine, I think he threatened to at a kind of meeting with the state officials that the municipal officials supposed to run those things that he threatened to make their apartments or their mansions into invincibility points unless they actually get things in order. So there are hiccups all around. It's like an unprecedented emergency, but overall, as long as I can go out somewhere and get all of those essential things, I don't complain.
So, want to pivot back to something you mentioned very early on about getting your papers in order. So, I think your interesting take on all this stems from the fact you're not originally from Ukraine. So, tell us about how you wound up in Ukraine.
So that was a thing with me in 2014, actually going back to 2011, 2012. That's when I became politically active. I went to all the election fraud protests. I
In
actually,
Russia.
Yeah, in Russia, actually, live streamed a lot of them when live streaming was still like quite a new thing. And then I was kind of out of it. And then in 2013, of course, I followed the Euromaidan a lot. Back then, I could basically read Ukrainian, I could understand spoken Ukrainian.
And Aaron here during post production. I apologize the interruption, but I was hoping to, doing this episode, document real life in Ukraine, and I should have been more careful what I wished for. We had a power cut and had to switch to the mobile network, which was a little spotty at times. I managed to clean up most of it. But if you hear any differences in audio quality or any fragments of the conversation that it was interrupted a couple of times, that's why. Let's jump back in.
I had a power cut. I just went over to cellular, went over to my laptop. I hope that works. It's actually to illustrate my earlier point. It went out 2.5 hours ahead of schedule, but they did warn that they would be off schedule for quite some time after the latest attack. There was this joke on Ukrainian Twitter which I loved a lot. It said like, "Grandpa, why do you do all your household chores in 3 hours?" Okay, whippersnappers, gather around and listen. I actually washed my clothes. I took a shower. I washed the dishes because the hot water is back on, and I baked some meat and potatoes. So, and all of that before the call.
Very, very productive, and apologize to listeners.
Yeah.
The cell signal is doing its thing here. You were in Russia. You were engaging with Euromaidan. You understood Ukrainian. So what happened next?
Crimea happened basically, and what I'm seeing is like on one side there is this kind of people triumphant in their democratic revolution, and on the other side there is some kind of protest went to. It was even unrelated to Ukraine. It was about some prisoner convicts over a political case, over the sham riot case at the Bolotny back in 2012. I went there, and someone called me an anti-Ukrainian slur while I was just standing there at a protest. Some passerby. That's something that moved me a lot. And then there was the Putin speech, the national traitor speech. It's not. He basically branded as that anyone who was against the annexation of Crimea is not the too many times when your president calls you that on national TV. And at that point, I thought that it was going to get worse. They were going to close the borders, Soviet style. That was what I thought. That not that it really happened, but the repression has intensified a lot really since then. So I decided I want to just go live in Ukraine, and it's gonna be fine. I still had my Russian remote job at this point, which means that I could really work around the, um, you know, exchange rate, and then uh, I know the language. I can understand actually both the languages, which is was another bonus. And of course, you didn't need back then even like your foreign passport, just your internal passport. That's the thing that we have both in Russia and Ukraine. So back then, it could use still use internal passport to enter Ukraine. So that's what I did. And then I just been living here and working on some stuff like translations, basically for some pro-Ukraine blogs. Then some work with Bellingcat. They joining the conflict intelligence team, which has done a great job um, investigating the Russian army's activities and the war crimes. And that's basically stuff I've been doing out here. And apart from that, I also came out as queer while here because I felt it like safer to do it than in Russia. And generally, the attitude of people to queerness is, you could say, like better. It's not like everyone is like waving your rainbow flags in LI. It's like some are either curious, like which one of you is the moment which is the dead, and some are indifferent, but there are very few people who are like openly hostile, except some like kind of smaller far right gangs. But other than that, it's pretty accepting for what you are. And I've been living here a lot. I've learned to love this country, you could say. That's actually one reason I didn't want to leave. Apart from, I think a papers issue could have been either ignored or kind of solved at the border. But I just didn't want to leave because that's kind of where I am. This is kind of, I wouldn't call it my home, but this is my place. And this is where I kind of sort of belong. You could say that, as opposed to some other random country in Europe where I would probably end up if I left.
Yeah, absolutely. So you mentioned earlier in the recording, or in our first recording before the blackout, that you did a media appearance in Ukrainian, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts. You know, having come from Russia, being a native Russian speaker, on language politics. Uh, I've watched over the course of the war videos, combat footage of people, Ukrainian soldiers using both Russian and Ukrainian. It seems like maybe less of an issue than it used to
And a
be, although
mixture of both, like a lot of time you hear like what they call surgic from the soldiers. We who are speaking like a mixture of Russian and Ukrainian, and that's also pretty common.
I guess I was going to say, is the language issue less salient or importance now? But was it ever really important? Do you think?
I think the language issue was always a thing that was primarily drummed up by politicians to get election points. Of course, mostly it's by the guys from Eastern Ukraine, the what they call pro-Russian Party of Regions, and other Yanukovych guys who just base a lot of their politics on resentment against Western Ukrainians, which would just code for Ukrainians, you could say. And on the other hand, you have people from like far right parties on the patriotic programs ostensibly side. When there was this boogie woman Irina Farion who like famously chastised school kids for speaking Russian and for using like Russian versions of their names. So this was most of the time it was a thing made by politicians for politicians. Of course, there were issues. There were some real examples of conflict. Is when people were refused to be served in Ukrainian, and that's something that happened a lot. Of Vice versa, when people refused to be served in Russian to a lesser extent. That's something that's been happening. And if you want to, like troll legislatively a politician from the eastern part of the country, you can like sue him for not using Ukrainian in a address, and that would like give him a small fine, and you'll have the guilty pleasure of cringing over him trying to speak Ukrainian in his next address.
Mm.
Because that would be like the funniest Ukrainian you'll ever hear. So there are some hiccups, but it's not like there is this kind of dividing line between Russian and Ukrainian. And of course, I have to add that just a lot of people and a lot of content has been switching to Ukrainian, especially since the start of the full-scale war. Like I have two friends who fully switched to Ukrainian, and even though it's I mean, in Kyiv, it's still basically, it's of course drifting towards Ukrainian, but it's still the unspoken rule, at least in like personal communication, that everyone speaks the language they are more comfortable with, and everyone is expected to understand both. That's basically the how Kyiv works. Kyiv is like most more of a central part of the stuff. Like you have uh, kind of how you have a county in an election that's basically always votes like America at large. I don't. I think you have a couple of those counties like this.
Yeah, bellwether.
Bellwether.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Bellwether. So I think Kyiv could be like a bellwether for Ukraine. Although there is of course different. Like you hear less Russian when you go west, and you hear more Russian when you go east. But still, Kyiv is still working on that rule. Operate, although within the quite some time, even before like the law that mandated to use Ukrainian as the first language, the default language of communication in services. Basically, that's what it. You can still like speak Russian if the customer wants you to, but so even before this law, you had big chain restaurants, you had big chain stores switch to Ukrainian their personnel. That's been kind of a thing, kind of revival of Ukrainian, because you could barely see a paper in Ukrainian in 2014. A lot of them were in Russian. There is a lot of stuff like that happening after. I think it was first time after the start of the war where I saw some websites forgo Russian entirely. Uh, Most of them still have both versions, like the majority and the largest ones will still have both versions. Some can be asked to translate some larger articles into Russian. Um, and but otherwise it's still like the same slow, sometimes bumpy drift towards Ukrainian that I've seen for the past 8 years, even though the process has somewhat been sped up because some people actually don't want to talk in Russian. You see the refugees like who are going from the occupied territories. They are trying their best to speak Ukrainian, and like based on my own experience, it sounds a lot like they are speaking Ukrainian for the first time. Like formulating longer sentences, not just some basic stuff at a market or at a store. They are doing it for the first time, and that's something that, of course, makes Ukrainian patriotic people very kind of proud for this moment of revival, let's say.
Last question for you today, and again, I'm so grateful for your take and insight here. Not trying to make a political point or score political points, but fact is, before the war broke out, Zelensky sat with an approval rating in the mid 20s, I want to say, so 25% or so. Not a very popular figure. Um, Before the war started, what would you have said about Zelensky as a leader, and what would you say now?
I'm in this very weird, very small minority who was actually pretty okay with both latest Ukrainian presidents. I mean, Poroshenko had his issues, like he had his dear friends, to quote Yushchenko, dear friends, is this Ukrainian meme about, because Yushchenko addressed people as dear friends, and he had quite a lot of dear friends with deep pockets. But he still was actually doing something useful, at least some reforms. The reforms that he didn't want to do, they could be like pushed through by the civil society, and the landscape was pretty much the same thing. Not like business as usual, but he at least was trying to do something, at least initially. Like one big thing that he did is digitalization. because that's one thing that helped immensely when the war started, because people could like access their smartphone and get some papers if they were forced to leave their papers back home. They could like file a claim of restoring damages caused by the war. They could report the enemy movements through this kind of app, all inclusive government app. DA it's called. But overall, his presidency before that, it was kind of uh, bumping from crisis to crisis. He had these conflicts over deconfliction. At first, he had some issues with conflicts with some veterans and patriots over deconfliction at the Donbass. Then he had the Ukrainian plane shot down in Iran. Then he had COVID. And then he had the slow burn constitutional crisis with some judges not wanting to enforce some of his laws, or making some of the important laws like anti-corruption laws invalid to the constitution, as they said. And then he had, the war. And before the war, it looked like actually living in servant of the people, because when your president is like busy with the show that propelled Zelensky to the presidency. So when your president is like dealing with the crisis du jour, it's kind of less fun when you're living inside it than when you're watching it on TV. And but well, the thing is that people say that Zelensky changed. I don't think he changed a lot per se, not in 2022. I mean, he was pretty naive about the whole war stuff during the presidential campaign in 2019. He had gaffes like, you just need to stop shooting. He had this kind of apolitical normie view on the war that is just the oligarchs, the Russian and Ukrainian oligarchs, digging it out while the common people are suffering. And but I think he started getting intelligence briefings. What happened? And he had a better understanding of that, and that that Putin does not want peace. Putin does not want a settlement. Putin wants the whole of Ukraine. And then he just, when the war started, he responded well in this, again, in a very normal way, although it's heroic, but that's how heroes are made. Heroes are normal people that just, it is in my view, who just commit to defending their way of life. At least in this case, like many Ukrainian citizens did the same what Zelensky did. We had this kind of taxi driver, whatever, hairstylist, I mean, a go-go dancer, or whatever guy who just goes and takes up arms or starts volunteering. I mean, the big thing about Zelensky is what people just don't, I think, internalize outside. Is just how normy he is. I'm repeating that word, but that's something that makes him really stand out of the political class. He is filthy rich, of course, compared to his character who became president, but he is not like oligarch rich. He still has a bunch of millions of his self-built business. When you call him a comedian, he's not just that. He basically built a whole media empire franchise, which is just the Ukrainian slash Russian version of humor, basically. Lots of shows, lots of amateur shows, lots of contests, and he ran all of this stuff. But still, he just became this normie upper middle class guy. He remained that. And this is when he got into politics. It was obvious by all of the things that he was doing, like he was trying to move the administration to some kind of a newer office space, but it ended up being like too costly an endeavor. And his reaction to this was also like a very normal guy who suddenly has his country being invaded, he has his people being killed, has his nation being genocided, and he just this is a very normal reaction to want to I don't know, rip your enemy's throat out, basically. And that's the thing that a lot of the Ukrainian people feel the same way. That's why they like him. And another thing is that he's shown that he's really into it. I mean, if you compare to how he handled COVID, I think he wanted COVID to just go away. It's like some kind of a problem that we want. They want to just go away, to just stop. They wanted like to declare victory over COVID as early as possible. But here he's really into it. He's really determined to see the war to the bitter end, hopefully to a less bitter end. And this is how they are, this is how he connects with most of the Ukrainian people, at least when you look at the polls.
Thanks again to Kirill for that incredible picture, and to you, listener, for joining. A quick reminder that there's a donation link for Vostok SOS in the episode description. The Bear Market Brief podcast is part of BMB Russia and Eurasia, a news brief that covers politics, economics, and the space in between. You can follow BMB at the Twitter handle @BearMarketBrief. BMB Russia and Eurasia is a project of the Foreign Policy Research Institute, that's FPRI, a nonpartisan think tank based in Philadelphia. For more information on this initiative and many others, visit fpri.org. Best holiday wishes, and I'll catch you next year.